So good evening, everyone, and good morning to those who are in the Asia Pacific region. My name is Dennis Simon, and I'm the moderator and organizer of what we call the China Innovation Series. And this is the second season that we're running this, and many of you may have received our poster announcing the four speakers that we will have for the fall 2021 season. We're really looking forward to having a very lively series of events, and they are brought to you by APSI here at Duke University. And also tonight, we're also co-sponsored by the Center for International and Global Studies, as well as the Center for Innovation Policy. And our purpose here is to really highlight the developments that are happening in China that are built around the theme of innovation and innovation progress in China, and trying to gain some insight into what is happening on the ground, both from the perspective of the policymakers in Beijing and at the provincial municipal level, as well as the enterprise level. And tonight, we're very fortunate to have as our lead speaker, Dr. William Fischer, who has been a professor at IMD and is now affiliated with MIT Sloan School of Management. And he's going to talk to us about Haier, one of China's most important companies. And he's going to bring us a perspective about innovation in China. As I said, Bill has been a professor. He's now emeritus professor of innovation management at IMD in Lausanne, Switzerland. And he's also the founder and co-directs the IMD program on driving strategic innovation in cooperation with the Sloan School of Management at MIT. Bill is an engineer by training, but he's lived much of his life in Asia and Europe. Formerly, he was at a school down the road from Duke, UNC, where he was the Dalton McMichael chaired professor in the business school, the Kenneth Flagler Business School. And later on, he became the president of the China-Europe International Business School, or CEIBS. And he was at CEIBS from 1997 to 1999. He was awarded by the city of Shanghai the Silver Magnolia Award, which is Shanghai's highest award for foreigners contributing to the city's economic and technological development. He first came to IMD in 1990 and was part of the IMD team that developed the managerial deep dive process for improving innovation performance inside companies. He's written and edited a number of books. His most recent book is Reinventing Giants: How Chinese Global Competitor Haier Has Changed the Way That Big Companies Transform Themselves. And that was published in 2011. Over the years, Bill has been recognized by a variety of sources for his professional achievements and presence, and he is somebody who is often cited in the media for his comments on recent developments. He has a DBA from George Washington University in the United States, and most important, he's been an avid ice hockey player, perhaps until recently, and he really has enjoyed his time on the ice, and he and I share that in common. As I mentioned, tonight's talk is going to be about Haier. Haier was founded in the early 1980s in China's Shandong province in the city of Qingdao, and today it is a multinational consumer electronics and home appliance company. In its early years, it was mainly known as the Qingdao Refrigerator Company, and its focus was on simply providing basic and affordable household appliances for Chinese families. But ultimately today, Haier has become one of the world's leading household appliance brands, with an increasing ambition to develop beyond its low price segment that sometimes we think about, and instead have a greater focus on innovation and high technology, and particularly something that the Chinese call the smart appliance economy. Now, Haier is not only known for its innovation inside, but it also has lots of innovation activity going on outside. It has 14 R&D centers worldwide and invested almost 7 billion yuan in the development of new technology and products over the last several years. It also is known for its key acquisitions of foreign companies. Perhaps the biggest one is in 2016 when Highend decided to purchase General Electric's appliances company for 5.6 billion US dollars, making it, again, one of the largest companies in the world. So I think we have a lot to learn from Highend, and I can think of no better person than Bill who can educate us about what's going on and give us some insights, because I think everyone has wanted to understand one simple question. China just a few years ago was an innovation laggard, and now we're talking about it as an innovation juggernaut. And I think Bill is going to tell us a story that, at least in the case of Highend, will help us understand what's gone on and what's made Highend now a successful company at the global level. With that, I'll turn it over to Bill, and for the next 35, 40 minutes here, you will hear from him. And then we'll have an equal amount of time at the end for questions from the audience. So without further ado, let me turn you over to Bill.
Thank you, Dennis. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I could speak about Highend all night long if you let me. So you're going to stop me at 7:42, I think it was. Yeah. But the thing that I really want you to go into this thinking about is that we're not, even though I'm an engineer by training, we're not going to get into technology all that much. What we're going to look at, and then later, Dennis and I actually wrote a piece for HBO, for Harvard Business Review, the website, on business model innovation, and used Highend as an example. But what we're seeing here is that Highend is really one of the world-leading organizations on organizational innovation, changing organizations to make them fit for purpose, or to be future fit, or however you want to put it. But they're really at the forefront of this. And I think that's what's so interesting about Highend today, is what they're doing organizationally. So let me tell you a little bit about this. I will, forgive me for going into slide sharing so quickly. But first thing I want to do is, when I saw the title, and this happened today, when I saw the title, the subtitle, Driving Innovation from Within, what I really wanted to say is that's not what we're going to talk about. What we're going to talk about is how Highend is really changed itself to be outside in, not inside out. And those of you who study innovation are probably well aware that outside in is the new mantra. Organizations that can get close to the customer, that can put their fingers on the pulse of the customer, that know the customer better than they know themselves, are much more likely to both succeed, because they understand what the customer is looking for, the jobs to be filled in the customer's life, but also to anticipate where the customer is going. And so they're able to position themselves well to be able to make bigger innovations than might otherwise be the case. And I think this is certainly the case of Highend. So what we're really going to see is reconfiguring the organization so the outside customers, but also partners, have much more of a say in what's happening in the organization than probably anyone ever thought would be possible or even desirable. And so what I tried to do was to search for a starting point that we all had in common. My understanding is you're a China audience, basically China-oriented audience. I'm a business school professor. I'm trying to see where those two intersect so that you come away thinking about your own situation as a result of tonight. And I guess there's 2 points that I think are important. One is, most of my day job is spent working with people in large, successful, market-leading, incumbent organizations. And the one thing that I think they all have in common, although I would never tell them this before evaluations, the one thing I think they all have in common is that they recruit talented people, they pay a premium for talented people, and then they quickly turn them into average performers. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the business sector, or we're talking about academia, or we're talking about government. It's almost always the same. We put people in organizational straitjackets that reduce their ability to fulfill their talent and drain them of the energy that they originally brought to the job. And I think this is terrible. I think this is an indictment of a failure of leadership and organizational design. And I would hope you're all thinking about, well, is that true in my case? Hopefully it's not, but my suspicion is that many of you think about this from time to time. The second thing is that when we look around us and we look at all we've accomplished as a society, particularly technologically, and you know, here I'm not just talking about the US, I'm talking about Europe, I'm talking about Asia, particularly the developed countries in those markets, including China. Despite the fact that we have such legacy organizations that really rob us of the full value of the talent, you have to think, what could we have accomplished if we had organizations that were different, if we had organizations that were more focused on user experiences, if we had organizations that were more inclusive, we had organizations that were empathetic, both inside and outside the organization, more supportive of employee talent, more radically open. What would the differences be? So I think Hire gives us an insight into both how you might do that and what the results would be. And I hope to share that with you as well tonight. So, and I also have to admit, as Dennis suggested, that there's a bit of irony, more than a little bit of irony in this presentation, because, you know, 40 years ago, I was in China, right here, there I am, as part of a group sent by the US Department of Commerce to, according to the New York Times, give Chinese the latest word on management skills. You know, it's ironic that today I'm speaking constantly to Western audiences, Japanese audiences, other Chinese audiences about what Chinese firms are doing, Hire in particular, and how the world changes, right? I think if anything, this is part of the success story that China has been over the last 40 years. So if we think about Hire, it's really a successful company in an old economy, commodity industry. So this is not Silicon Valley, right? This is not a group of youngsters running around in flip-flops, you know, doing whatever they want to do. This is real people making real things. 70, 80,000 people doing real things. And they're trying to cope with unprecedented technical and customer expectation change, right? Never before has the customer expected so much out of the experience that they are buying into when they purchase a product. And to be fully transparent, I have a longstanding both academic observer relationship with Hire. That's where that book, Reinventing Giants, came out of, and a whole bunch of articles that I wrote. But also I now spend a lot of time as a management consultant with them, mostly trying to explain what Hire is doing to the outside world in a way that's conveyed more effectively, perhaps, than might otherwise happen. But it's there, okay? So let's start talking about home appliances. We all are familiar with home appliances. There's something we all also have in common. If you look at the Chinese market for home appliances for between 2013 and 2020, you know, the market's been growing steadily, but not spectacularly. 2020 was a down year, largely because of the coronavirus, but I'm sorry, not the corona, the COVID-19 virus. But if you take a look at the sales drop, it's not that alarming, right? And so this is when we talk about an industry that's mature. This is a mature industry, at least in terms of sales. If we take a look at volume and yuan sales, what we see is some surprises. So between 2019 and 2020, if we take a look at refrigerators alone, which happens to be the largest category of Hire's domestic appliance sales, the sales are up almost 6%. That's not bad. That's faster than probably most markets, with the exception of Europe, Western Europe, anywhere. If we take a look at the the value of those sales in terms of yuan. So this is units. This is yuan amounts. They're up 20%. That's interesting. That grabs your attention, I think, because you don't see that in most mature markets. Incidentally, the reason for this is largely due to the Internet of Things hitting the home and resulting in connected smart homes. And the kitchen has really been the beachhead for that invasion of Internet of Things technology into our living spaces. At Higher, the organization believes that their ultimate advantage is not lower cost. So when you take a look at the Chinese domestic market, you'll see some of their competitors compete essentially on the basis of lower sticker prices. But what Higher believes is that if they can somehow create a better customer experience, then they don't have to lower prices. In fact, maybe they can even raise them. And they don't want to lower prices because they see that as a one-way street to oblivion. And what would also happen is that they would put themselves in a much more secure place vis-a-vis foreign competitors. In order to do this, however, they've got to unleash the talent in their organization. And specifically, they believe that there's a lot of entrepreneurial talent in the organization that's been latent, been undiscovered, if you will. And so part of what they're trying to do is to unleash that talent so that it really fulfills more of its potential. You know, not a bad objective for any organization, allowing its people to fulfill more of their talent potential. This is the book that Denis mentioned. I think it came out in 2013, not 2011, but whenever it came out, it was obsolete essentially the day it appeared on the, literally, I think the day it appeared, because at that point in time, Higher was embarking on another transformation in a continuous series of transformation over 40 years. And that's that latest transformation is what we're going to talk about today. So in 2019, Qingdao Higher became Higher Smartphones, Smart Homes, and you'll see that they're basically subdivided into the for data collection into overseas, and then the major products that Higher is involved in the domestic market, which includes, you know, standard refrigerators, washing machines, ovens, air conditioners, water heaters, water purifiers, but also trying to provide channel services. So great logistics, which they've now made open to their competitors, as well as the domestic part of Higher, smart homes, and also the last 500 yards, if you will, where they now have a thriving business on receiving the internet purchases, any internet purchase of people who live in these huge buildings that you see all over China, and not only receiving those, but also installing them and servicing them if the opportunity arises. So it's an interesting business to be in, and they are growing in terms of the way they redefine the business almost from year to year. Also, as Denis indicated, they have been very active, very ambitious in both establishing their own brands, the Higher brand. Parenthetically, my wife and I are renovating an apartment, and one of the things we have to replace is a GE refrigerator, 30 years old. And we're going through Consumer Reports and Wirecutter. The Higher branded refrigerators look pretty good in terms of their performance and also in terms of their price. Casati is a high-end, Higher brand. Leader is a brand for the younger market. Aqua is the old Sanyo brand from Japan. Fischer is the market leader in New Zealand, probably in Australia too. I'm not certain about that, but certainly a very strong presence elsewhere through exports. GE Appliances, which is now a Higher company, and Candy, their most recent big acquisition, which is the European part of Hire today. It stretches not only in Western Europe, but also into Russia as well. If we take a look at the revenue of Hire Smart Home, which used to be Hire Qingdao, what we see is considerably faster growth than the domestic market would suggest. Well, a lot of that is due to their overseas acquisition, which have added revenues to the top line. But it's been a fairly impressive period for them, certainly since the acquisition of GEA in 2016. And if you take a look at now the ratio between domestic and overseas revenue from 2017 to 2020, what you see is it's more or less 50-50 today, with the domestic market having a slight majority, but not a lot. If you look at the markets that they serve, domestic China market is the largest market. Second largest is North America, that's GEA. Then Europe, which is the fastest growing, and then Southeast Asia, Australia, Japan, and the like. And if you look at the distribution of appliance sales at home, what you see is refrigerators. They sell more refrigerators probably than anything else. But there's a lot of, it's pretty close when you look at washing machines and air conditioning at home. Not all of their competitors share this distribution, this rather equal distribution. And this gives Hire an advantage when it comes to the interconnected home, because in fact, they pretty much have a presence throughout the kitchen. So if you're interested in a smart kitchen, they provide essentially a one-stop shopping opportunity, which has been very attractive to Chinese customers. Worldwide, Hire is way out ahead of everyone. And two things are attributable to that. One is the size of the Chinese domestic market, but media is also a Chinese market. And Hire has that large home market to build on. But they've also been much more aggressive than the other firms, their competitors, in expanding globally through acquisition. And that's paid off in terms of global leadership, in terms of global revenue. The other thing I think that's interesting is that they're well positioned in markets that are not fully saturated. So you look at, for example, mainland China, you look at ovens, 43% of the market has an oven, 21% has a dishwasher, 28% has a standalone freezer, 86% has a refrigerator. They're well positioned for continued growth going into the future. The same with their market presence in India, the same with their market presence in Japan, the same with their market presence in Russia. Look at these numbers here for dishwashers and freezers, and the same for their market in South Korea. So even though they're up against strong hometown competition in these other markets, they're really growth markets, and Hire has a strong brand and now a global image. It's serving them well. One consulting company which looks at market standings versus market potential finds Hire in the upper right-hand corner, way ahead of everybody else, because only Samsung is really close because of the positioning that they have in these markets that are still ripe for growth. So that's an interesting position. But what that means is that what we have is a Chinese firm that is actively managing many different foreign pieces, successful foreign pieces, in a portfolio. And how they do that, I think, is an interesting part of this conversation. If we look at Hire's position in the US, Germany, France, New Zealand, Russia, Thailand, India, Japan, Hire is the large blue line. And nobody else really even comes close. So maybe media in Russia, and possibly Hisense in Japan. But China Haier is way out ahead, 2018, of these other competitors. I think that's impressive. I mean, to be honest with you, when I was putting these slides together, I was more impressed with Haier's positioning internationally than I had been, and I spend most of my life talking about Haier. But the thing that I think captures most imaginations is it went from being bankrupt in 1984. Many of you, most of you, all of you know the story of how Haier, John Ray Min, who had just moved from the Light Industry Bureau of the Qingdao municipality to being the managing director, so to speak, of general manager of the Qingdao Refrigerator Company. He was accosted by an irate customer who claimed his refrigerator didn't work. They went into the finished goods inventory. 20% of the finished goods inventory didn't work. I mean, didn't work at all. And so John Ray Min took, I think it was 76 refrigerators, brought them out into the street, bought 76 sledgehammers, had 76 of the workers who built these refrigerators come out, and he told them, smash them up. We'll never make a product like this again that doesn't work. I was living in Dalian at the time. My neighbors, it was on Chinese television because, of course, they had the foresight to bring a television crew out. My neighbors said, the man is crazy. What is he thinking about? These are perfectly good refrigerators. And, I pointed out they didn't work, but the response was, nothing works around here, but we can fix it. We have a great economy to fix things. Better to have a refrigerator that doesn't work than not to get one at all. And so, but John Ray Min's idea at the time was, if the reforms work, if Deng Xiaoping's promise is realized, then, 20, 30, 40 years from now, who knows, we're going to have sophisticated customers who are interested in quality products. So we better start building them now, and we better put brands on them so that people know who we are. And then incidentally, along the way, we can charge a premium for them as well. And, you take that combination of smart visionary business model and you tie it into cultural reengineering. And one of the things that you get is an organization that is, world leader in many, many different ways. It's been a long journey, and I don't want to give you the impression it's been continuous and fault-free. Not at all, but they've persevered. So I think what's interesting for a business school professor is not only is this an illustration that talks to most of the people I run into who are not going home to Silicon Valley at the end of a program, but are going back to a well-established incumbent market leader organization that's gone stale, and they're looking for a way to revitalize it. But Haier is really impressive because it's been doing this for 40 years. It's done it across all of its activities. So it's not piloting here or piloting there, but it's all in. Everybody's involved in this. It's bold. I think it's really bold. It's technology, it's culture, it's business model, it's structure, it's all those things, right? And it's been persistently experimental. The whole way, it's been experimental. So we don't see this very often. And it's succeeded. And we don't see that very often either. So it's a really interesting story from that regard. It's an innovation story, but not just technology. It's mindset innovation as well. So let me tell you what they're doing. They're building an organization where the customer experience is more important than the solutions that they produce, okay? So it's one thing to produce refrigerators, it's another thing to change the way the customer thinks about dining, nutrition, life at home. And that's what Haier's interested in. It's the experience more than the products. And that's more difficult because you don't have you don't have access to all the expertise domains. Haier's never done this before, right? So I exaggerate, but all the time. But one of the things I tell people is that Haier's an organization that has had for over 35 years or so had a customer journey that was 30 minutes every 15 years. The customer would come in, they'd buy a product. If they liked it, it worked, they'd leave, they'd come back 15 years later. Today, they talk to the customer 10 or 15 times a day. They want recipes, they want wine pairings, they want to know where the food comes from. Is it organic? I mean, there's no end to what the customer wants. And I think Highend was unprepared for that. You can carry on any of us can do a 15-minute conversation or a 30-minute conversation every 15 years. But 10 or 15 times a day about recipes and wine pairings and organic, that's beyond the competency of most of the organizations I work with. So what we've got is a really different situation in terms of what they have to do. And they need to be more open and more inclusive inside and outside than they've ever been before. They're pushing decision-making down so low that they've disbanded corporate strategy. Neither Highend nor General Electric Appliances as a corporate strategy group anymore. Strategy is made at the lowest level possible through tactics. But they move faster and are much better informed about their customers than anyone else. They're acting more like a startup than a conventional organization. And so they have more people engaged in the life of the organization, more energy, more ideas. I hear this all the time, everywhere I go in the Highend community, people talking about how surprised they are about how their workforce is engaged. And what this means to me is that they're going beyond the solutions. We talked about this, the refrigerators, a box to chill food, and machines to wash clothing. And they're thinking about dining experiences or how you dress. They're reconfiguring the customer experience that they're focusing on. I apologize. I don't even understand what that's saying over there, but they're reconfiguring the organization to fit a different customer experience. They're enjoying more of the energy and insights and experience of their employees. They're treating their employees as colleagues, not assets. They're allowing them a greater say in what they do. They're giving them the authority to choose what they do, how they do it, who they wish to hire and fire, and how they share the results in terms of profit reward distribution. And we're now talking at the lowest level of the organization. That's pretty remarkable. In personal terms, it means that, and this comes from a conversation I had this afternoon with a Western European manager who's involved in this. He says, my life has changed because I've gone from, I'm telling you what to do, to me asking, tell me what you are going to try, and I'll try to help you do it. He said that's a very humbling change in role. They're scaling all of this, but not by direction, but by hiving, by letting people break off little pieces that they can run by themselves. They're really, I think they're looking at the entire organization as a portfolio of opportunities, rather than a portfolio of departments or projects. And organizations mature, but a portfolio of opportunities doesn't have to. So it puts a different spin on the way you think about where is this going and how's it going to work. A friend of mine said today they're running a massive exploration exercise. I think that's really too. Not a massive exploitation exercise, but one that engages people in the act of exploration. And it's an organization where running a smaller business can be better than running a bigger one. I mean, Kevin Nolan, the CEO of General Electric Appliances, tells me all the time that his job is walking around trying to figure out how to make things smaller rather than larger. Organizational units smaller so that they can run faster and don't require approvals. And they're acquiring market-leading firms around the world. But what's interesting is that they are saying to them, we want you to become more like us, but you figure out how to do it, because doing this in Japan is going to be different than New Zealand, is going to be different than Europe, it's going to be different than the United States. So each acquired part of Highend has a very different interpretation of how this change takes place. So four things to think about. One is, at the heart of this philosophy are three guiding principles. Everything relies on those. The first is Highend is going to create a great user experience. This has been guiding principle number one since 1984. And this is also what Peter Drucker claims that the purpose of a business was. The purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer, not to drive shareholder value, right? But to create and keep a customer. The second part of these guiding principles is that entrepreneurship is the best way to do this. So it's not only great customer experience, but it's freeing up people to be entrepreneurs because entrepreneurs look for change, respond to it, and exploit it as an opportunity. Entrepreneurs are, never sleep. They're always up, and they know more than the difference is what they know rather than what they do. And then a third guiding principle that Zhang Ruimin, the CEO pictured here, has added is that if we do this, we're going to share the value created. We're going to share it with the customer who enjoys greater value created. We're going to share it with the people who made it possible. So that's very different. That turns out to be the biggest stumbling point that most firms have in emulating what Highend is doing. So the experimentation has gone from command and control to matrix to strategic business units to turning the pyramid upside down, and now to creating an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that ecosystem has resulted in a fundamental change in the structure. So the ecosystem says there's a world of potential partners out there who we probably don't even know about, and who, if we only knew about them, would not only fill gaps, but might co-create new possibilities. In order to do that, we've got to create organizational elements that reach out to them, that want those new ideas, that are interested in spontaneity, that are really interested in co-creation. And if we do that, we have other organizational elements like platforms, excuse me, that host these micro enterprises and share and make learning a scalable process. That's interesting. That's a very different approach to organization than most of us are used for, and it works. Right. So in 2020, for the 12th consecutive year, they were first in global retail sales of household appliances, top in refrigerators, top in washing machines, top in freezers, top in wine cabinets. So, in a nutshell, that's why we find Highend so interesting as an innovator. Yes, technology, but it's all the other stuff, business model and organization, that really is gaining everyone else's attention. I'm going to stop here, Dennis. I think almost on time, maybe a little early.
Actually, 7:39. You beat it by 3 minutes. Great. Thank you very much, Bill. Really good. Let me throw a couple questions to you before we take audience questions, because I think that there's some really interesting issues that you've put on the table. The first is maybe the most obvious. You're describing a company that neither is drawing from Western experience largely, because you're telling us about Western companies who are dying to know the secret sauce that makes Highend successful. And you're also telling us about a company that's not really typical Chinese company either, because if it was a typical Chinese company, the whole Chinese economy would have taken off, or much earlier, and it would end up being even more innovative than some allege it already is. So where did this come from? In other words, it's not Western, it's not typical Chinese. So where does this ethos that you're talking about come from? Is it really the product of Zhang Ruimin, or is there something else going on here?
So it is different, right? I mean, it's unique, maybe not unique, but it's certainly different than most of the organizations we see either in the West or in China. The dream, I think, the dream was Zhang Ruimin's. I think that he's very interesting. He's met everybody, read everything. When you go to speak with him, it's like going through your doctoral exams. He knows everybody, and he knows everything. He's read everything, and so he's redefined the job of the chairman as being not necessarily micromanaging anybody, but spending the time thinking about what could be. And he's insanely curious. I also think he makes a real conscious effort to combine Chinese philosophical messages with Western Peter Drucker type of logic, right? Drucker was a great believer, I think, in all people. I don't think he was particularly Western by inclination. and I think that Jiang Zemin tries to steer that same path. I spoke to him last week, and I was talking about fractals as a way of thinking about hire, and he responded was fractals are a Western notion. In China, we have an old poem that talks about how the moon is reflected in many different lakes in the same fashion. I think he's always striving to speak to the emotional heart of the people who work at hire without necessarily, not paying attention to what's happening elsewhere in the world as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess those of us who follow the Chinese economy are always interested in, when you take a company like that that's very successful, we could look at Alibaba, we could look at Huawei, and we could also hold them up as exemplars of what seems to be working at the enterprise level in Chinese companies. But we don't hear a similar story when we talk about Huawei. We talk about government support and intervention and things of that sort. We talk about Lenovo. We hear, Ad bought IBM's PC business, and really they got the injection of what IBM already knew about that business. Alibaba, of course, is a unique specimen by itself, but we don't know again how generalizable that one is. And so there is this kind of question that's lurking behind if hire is really like kind of a sui generis, it really is very unique, then what can we say more broadly about the Chinese economy? How many more hires can be created by virtue of either having a charismatic leader or having some kind of government policy, or, to go back to Dalian, to creating some kind of Dalian or SIEBS or some kind of management training program where you're producing Jiang Zemin's. You may recall when Steve Jobs passed away, there was an entrepreneur in China that wanted to create Steve Jobs University. He basically asked the question, who is China's Steve Jobs? And he said, well, why don't we just produce them? And so we'll create a university in which we'll imbue people with the philosophy, mindset of a Steve Jobs. And of course, that never really happened. But there was some discussion about this for a while. Is Jiang Zemin, can he be copied? Can he be replicated? What's the takeaway from all of this? Or do we just have this isolated firm that's sitting there in the midst of a sea of inefficiency and other kinds of problems?
So I think what the thing that always interests me, and which is the thing that I think fails when I talk about this illustration to other managers outside of hire, whether they're in China or not, is that these are tough choices, right? So it's easy to say these things, but the choices you have to make are really difficult. And there's a lot of, I've often portrayed hire as dreams and discipline. The dreams are big. You have to dream big, right? That's not a characteristic that's naturally associated with people who rise through corporate ranks. Most of them think smaller, get things done, and are unblemished by mistakes. Hire has made a lot of mistakes, or not a lot, but some big ones, but they've been big mistakes, right? And so they got people's attention. I don't think there's any doubt in anybody at Hire's mind where the organization's going. 40 years of 2 or 3 guiding principles, that leaves no doubt. Nobody shows up today at Hire and is surprised by continuous change. I don't think. I think everybody sort of knows. It's become an employer brand, right, for people who want to be entrepreneurial. And so if you have that sort of wind behind you, then you can give people license to be entrepreneurs. And that's what they've done. But the details make it work, I think. So it's easy to become an entrepreneur. It only takes 3 colleagues to propose a new micro enterprise, but you have to be hosted on a platform, and you have to bring your own seed capital. So it's not it's not easy to go crazy. You're putting a lot at risk out of your own personal savings or incurring bank loans that could come back to haunt you or what have you. Much of what happens after that is contractually based. And John Ray Min sees the contracting piece as being extremely important in doing what they're doing, because it defines what the nature of the relationship is. It defines how you're going to share the value. It defines almost everything. So this is not an organization out of control. Quite the contrary. There's a lot of structure, but the structure isn't around the individual, and the structure isn't around the organization. The structure's around the commitments that you make to each other in order to be able to prosper, right? Unless I enter into a contract with you, I don't get any income, and you might not be able to achieve your goals. So there's this, it's in our interest to make this work. And the organization stays out of our way. It doesn't make it hard to do this. It makes it easier to do this. So I'd like to say there's some magic, but I'm struggling to figure out what the magic is. It almost always seems like they're doing what you would recommend them to do, but so many of us can't do it. I think the hardest thing is giving up control. I see managers. I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago. The guy was from a big U.S. insurance company. He wanted to understand what Highend was doing. I explained it. He said, yeah, well, that doesn't fit our measurement system at all. Well, of course not. I mean, it's not designed to do that. It's a different approach, and it has a different measurement system. And you just can't, bolt things on and think they're going to work well.
Right. Well, that talks more about Western culture than Chinese culture. I mean, Chinese culture is almost infinitely flexible. There are many things. It's sort of like Deng Xiaoping saying about the black cat, white cat doesn't really matter as long as it catches mice. Well, it seems that if you can catch the customer with this product, then okay, let's work on it. You know what I mean? But I'm really struck by this idea of smart technology, because a number of years ago we saw Samsung and LG who were looking for advantages, and they started to bring the smart perspective into their devices. You put in milk, and it tells you have a half a gallon left, and you have a quarter of a gallon, and then a little buzzer goes off and says you need to buy milk. And I thought it was pretty neat. But of course, when you looked at the product, the refrigeration wasn't as good as it was in some of the well-known brands, and so people haven't jumped on it as quickly as they had hoped. But remember, just a few years ago, Highend was making dorm room refrigerators. Mm-hmm. And it was making small wine refrigerators. Right. And people were complaining because the wine was freezing, the milk that they put in the dorm room refrigerators was freezing, and no one wanted this stuff. And it's funny you brought up Sanyo because that was the replacement. Sanyo or Panasonic. In fact, it's interesting. We don't hear the Japanese names anymore. No. We either hearing Samsung, LG. Or Highend, or one or two Bosch and a couple other companies. The landscape of that industry has seemingly changed really immensely over the last few years. But what is it in product-wise that they're doing that really has improved quality? Because quality is always number one. I mean, Ford said it, job number one is quality, etc. Highend, in order to be a world-class brand, has to have good, reliable quality. So what's made that happen? What's if it's not secret sauce, it must be something that's gone on to allow them to do it in a way that other Chinese companies just can't seem to get to.
Well, I think it's the focus on the customer experience rather than the product. You can make a crummy product and, who cares? But if you make a crummy product and you're worried about experience, then the customer cares. And you're going to fail with respect to what your goal is. Your goal is to have a great customer experience. And so one of the things they do now is that they in the way in which they organize it, in areas where customer experience is absolutely critical, and name one where it isn't. They have micro enterprises that specialize in customer experience, and they have micro enterprises that specialize in building products. And those micro enterprises come together in a mutually rewarding relationship very early on, right at the beginning of a project. So when you're designing that product, you now have colleagues who are worried about the customer experience. And I think building that in early and giving somebody responsibility for it has made a huge difference. Customer experience is no longer an afterthought. It's really now, I think, Hire's distinctive signature, at least in the domestic market. When you use the Samsung example, when Samsung, I think Samsung is one of the great OEM producers in the world. And if you think about who's the best contract manufacturers, it's either Samsung or Foxconn. And then at some point, Samsung wanted to be like Apple. Was dazzled by what Apple was doing. Incidentally, Foxconn is in that particular position right now. And what they didn't realize, or what they chose to neglect, is that over the years, they had both, Samsung and Foxconn, built great corporate cultures around variance reduction, getting the surprises out. We're not going to have any surprises in our way our product works. We're not going to have any surprises in the way our product looks. We're not going to be surprises in the supply chain. We're not going to be surprises on anything. No surprises, which is exactly what you want from an OEM contractor. That's exactly what you want. But Apple's magic is about putting surprises in, not getting them out.
Right.
And you want to do that, you got to fundamentally change your culture. And Samsung has been either unwilling or unable to do that. So I think Samsung has caught up to Apple, but I don't think it'll ever surpass Apple, because catching up is easy, surpassing is difficult, requires a different culture. And I think in Hire's case, by encouraging everybody to be an entrepreneur, by tying their incomes directly to the success of their products in the marketplace, and by giving somebody responsibility for customer experience early rather than late, I think that they've built a machine, an organization machine that helps put surprises in and isn't reckless about how it does them.
Okay, great. Okay, let me remind our audience also, if you've got some questions, please submit them to you by using the Q&A function, and I will pick them up as we go along. I'll throw one more question out to Bill, and then I'll revert to the audience questions. I think one of the most interesting things when I saw that you had changed the title of the talk, and well, that's an old story anyway. One of the funny things that's going on right now is that there are a lot of people in the United States that are criticizing Chinese companies because they're kind of like sponge-like. They're just apparently soaking up everything that they can in order to build high-speed rails, in order to build the semiconductor industry, in order to build telecom switches or cell phones, you name it. These companies are being accused of doing this kind of external, not just simply learning, but literally absorbing a tremendous amount. Now, I remember writing articles in the 80s and 90s talking about the limited absorptive capacity of Chinese enterprises, that they could buy stuff, but they really couldn't internalize it.
Right.
And now all of a sudden here's Bill Fischer talking about the ability of Hire to bring in all this knowledge, sort it out, configure it in different ways, and then apply it in a way that allows them now to become a world-class competitor. What happened?
So I think in Hire's case, they changed from an organization that was closed to an organization that was much more open. So it was not unusual. It's not unusual for people to come from outside of Hire with a good idea, and have a project that Hire agrees to host. So what that now Hire may or may not take an equity position in that company as a result of that. and if they do, it's probably a small percentage. But what it does is it gives higher, it gives the platforms people who are coming from the outside and with new ideas, with ideas that are fundamentally different than what Hire has traditionally worked on. And it's, I think, like a small, shock over and over and over again that says there's a bigger world out there than we have in here. And there are people who know a lot of stuff, and we ought to bring them into the community rather than keep them out. As we go into ecosystems, the ecosystems that Hire is part of really are ecosystems that are created because Hire needs skills and expertise and insight that they don't have inside. And so they're smart enough to realize that if they run those ecosystems like a traditional value chain, they'll crush that. You'll turn partners into vendors, and you'll pretty soon get down to what price are we talking about. And Hire is resistant. I have to say that the ecosystems I've observed has resisted that. They don't want to be they want to create an ecosystem because it's good for everybody, and they want to participate in the value created, the marginal value created, but they don't want to dominate it. They're very careful about dominating either with brand or with influence. And I think the result is that they're putting more and more of their entrepreneurs, for lack of a better term, they're putting more and more of their entrepreneurs in a very rich environment that's stimulating even more ideas. So a lot of the ecosystem revenues are being driven by the ideas of people outside of Hire, who come together with Hire either because they have better distribution channels, or they have better retail outlets, or they have better manufacturing facilities, or whatever. But the ideas come from outside, and then over time, they become better ideas because of the participation of Hire and other ecosystem partners involved. Is that,
right. Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. The interesting question, to me, is that we've heard recently about the Chinese economic environment, about Xi Jinping sort of taking a step away from the reform orientation that his predecessors had, that there's a sort of a return to a state capitalism model and things of this sort in China. So it just makes it doubly interesting how Hire is able to carry forward in this kind of situation where the external environment seems to be less supportive of this, more like freelancing than it was in the past. And here's Jiang Ruimin carrying forward. I don't know how many other hires China can develop.
Right. So remember, they're not a state-owned enterprise.
Right.
They're not in the high-tech sector. They're not national security or anything like that.
Right.
They're a big employer in the Shandong province. So they've got to have great support from the local government. They work with, they're working the healthcare sector. They're working a variety of places. They worked with Redmond Rabau to make them more effective as organizations. And I think that everybody in government really is looking for more effectiveness out of the organizations that they have. So I don't think they're seen as a threat. They're not political. They're very careful to have a blend of Chinese philosophy and emotional appeal, and yet some of the ideas come from outside. So I don't think they're certainly not testing the government in any way.
Right. Okay. Let me take one of our audience questions, which is, can you compare the innovation capability at Hire with the innovation capabilities of their global competitors? Hire has 14 R&D centers around the world. How good is Hire at innovation in the traditional way that we think about it, particularly when we think about their competitors? Where does Hire stand out?
So I would first of all, I would say disregard the 14 centers. I mean, they exist. They're sources of ideas and technology, but the real innovation is taking place at the microenterprise level. And much of it is not technical, but much of it is the result of partnering. And the ideas come not from the R&D people, but the ideas come from people at the micro enterprise who are close to the action. So it's a very different approach to innovation. Their tagline is zero distance to the customer. And when I talk to people about some of the interesting things that are going on in food or in clothing or in healthcare, the ideas come from really being close enough to the customer to recognize their pain points, which typically do not require high technology. An example that everybody would be familiar with in the West is how, Gillette year after year after year spent billions of dollars putting more blades on the side of a shaft, and a bunch of guys with a very limited budget called Dollar Shave Club created better delivery system, get it in the mail rather than having to go shop for it. And so they found the pain point, and it was almost always a non-technical issue. It almost always is a non-technical issue. And they're able to address that very quickly. They don't need approval. There's no compliance. They're fast because they don't have all of the requirements that Western firms have who are trying to build integrated portfolios. Hire's not. And so what begins to happen is that the advantage isn't in, there's a lot of innovation, but it isn't in the traditional R&D centers. It's everywhere else. Incidentally, I say that, but if you think about General Electric appliances and you go down to Louisville, Kentucky, where the General Electric General Electric appliance campuses, you see a couple of things. One of the things you see is that they've moved their R&D center so that it's right across the street from the University of Louisville's campus, and it's open from like 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. with nobody checking who you are when you go in. It's open to the public, so people can walk in and look at what's being worked on. They say they get more ideas that way. I ask them, don't you lose ideas? And they say, yeah, probably, but we think you get more than we lose. Right. The other thing is that they have a group called First Build, and those guys are an R&D center, but they're building pizza ovens, and they're building 500,000 pizza ovens before they hand it over to somebody else. So they're doing end to end, and they're innovating the entire time. So it's a different approach to intellectual property, different approach to outside in versus inside out, I think.
Okay. Another question has to do with the merger or acquisition of GE. How has GE changed Hire? What were the big benefits that Hire got? And why should we believe that GE, which is a major multinational, sort of failed to make a profitable business out of this white good, and yet Hire, bought up the whole thing, and it's making a run out of it. So what's happened here?
So on that last point, in the 4.5 years since Hire bought GEA, revenues have doubled and profits have tripled, right? And those numbers are not, because they're part of a consolidated accounting statement, they're not open. But I got that this week from Mr. Jung. They say that, and more than 14,000 employees at GEA are now receiving an incentive component in their overall compensation. And that's 85% of people who are in the factories. When GE was in charge, almost nobody had it. Like 5 or 6 people had incentives, and everybody else got a standard rate. So there's been profound changes. I went down to Louisville shortly after about a year maybe after the acquisition, and what I found, what I heard, what was that people were saying that in the old GE organization, they were a cash cow. They provided reliable revenues, cash flow for everybody else in the organization. So their mission was, don't screw this up, right? Innovate not to win, but play not to lose. And right. They said that sapped all of the energy and imagination that young people, new hires brought to GEA. Within a year of hires acquisition, they were saying things like, we're now playing to win, but we've got a future back. We didn't have a future before. We were stuck in the present until it became the past. Now we're being asked to build a future for us, for our organization. And of course they said, it was as if we were dealing with bankers at GEA, and now we're dealing with appliance people. We speak the same language. They understand what we're doing. So I think there's a lot going on that made it an attractive acquisition. Originally GE sold the appliance business to Electrolux, and then the U.S. the Department of Justice came in and said that would be a violation of antitrust, and so the deal fell apart. And that's when Highend came in and bought them. So that and I think that what Highend got out of that was they have a presence in North America. They have the right to use the GE logo for 40 years, which seems an incredibly long time. They have an up and running organization with a lot of good people, but people who weren't allowed to be as good as they could be. And so now I think what we're seeing is that the organization is the fastest growing home appliance company in the U.S. at the moment.
So it's funny, I drove in a Volvo, and you may know this weekend, and this Volvo, is Gully, Geely, however you want to pronounce it, bought them up, and everyone was worried that, quote unquote, the Chinese would mess up Volvo. And I'm sure people also had the same thinking, well, Highend's going to mess up GE. But you're telling a very different story, that in fact, they've imbued this company that was sort of, not very unimpressive, you know what I mean, at some point. And they've made it now much more lively, much more dynamic in an industry, which is, as you said, an old economy industry.
Well, but it was they had a very light touch. I think Highend is very much aware of some of the spectacular failures of Chinese acquisitions of U.S. manufacturing firms in the Midwest, and they didn't want to repeat that. And so they had their own experience in the U.S. in the 80s, I guess in the 90s, and in South Carolina, where they had a washing machine factory, I think it was. They have had a very light touch in both North America and Europe. They haven't abdicated their responsibilities, right? And they have high expectations for both the North American operation and the European operation, Western European operation, to become more entrepreneurial. But what they're saying to the local managers is, you guys know your local markets and cultures better than we do. So what we want you to do is to take our approach, more entrepreneurship, great customer expectations, sharing value, and interpret it into your market. It's not acceptable you do nothing, but but we're trusting you to figure out how to make it work. And I know both the CEO in North America and Western Europe pretty well, and I think they are conscientiously moving the organizations into a different mindset. It takes time, but the mindset's more entrepreneurial, and the customer experience is at the forefront of what they're doing.
Okay. Let me ask one last question, and that question is, what keeps Jiang Ruimin up at night? What keeps him from having a good night's sleep? What kind of issues is Highend worried about as it looks to the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the basis for competition in home appliances is changing, and because of hyperconnectivity, and there are new players in the industry, the arena. As Rita McGrath, Columbia, would talk about arenas rather than industries. I think she's right. And those new competitors are people like Apple and Google and Amazon, who own voice activated systems, Siri and Alex and or Echo or whatever it is. And I think that what they realize, what Highend realizes, is that the voice activated system is going to be more important in the future than it is today, much more important. And it's unlikely that we're going to have more than one. So we're going to settle on, you and I might settle on different ones, but it's going to be probably one that's portable and we take from home to work or whatever. Incidentally, I do some work for one of the big European automobile companies, and they're worried about the same thing. They're saying that we don't want to just be the container that drives Siri to work. You know, we want to be part of the customer experience. And I think that's possibly one of the things that keeps them up at night. The other thing, and this is complete speculation, right? But the other thing is that I'm interested in is as ecosystems become more important, then you have the relationships become more important. The more important assets are the relationships rather than the traditional assets, brand, IP, manufacturing. And so what I see is that there'll be pressures for the organization to spin in such a way that there's drifting, that the ecosystems will drift away. And I don't think Mr. Jung is worried about that. And I have to say that over the last couple of weeks, I've been asking everybody I've had a chance to talk to about, do they see this? And nobody sees it. It's interesting that they see their employees are more vested in their micro enterprise than they might be in the traditional higher organization. But they say that the brand is extremely important, that they're proud to be affiliated with the brand, and that they don't see it at a risk of drifting off into space. But that would be something I would worry about as well.
That you would worry about. Okay, well.
I think what am I? What do we have here in terms of an organization if everybody is somewhere else, right? Intellectually, if not anything else.
Right, but how embedded, I mean, you have to ask yourself the question, how embedded is the culture? Because at some time you're going to have a succession, Jung Raymond is not going to be, he's going to retire or whatever. And, you're going to have a leader who can carry forward philosophically and then logistically and operationally with the kind of philosophy that Jung, allegedly imbued into this enterprise. So that has to be a big question about what comes next after Jung.
I've spoken about this with him, and what he says is really interesting. He says, people say, who's going to be the leader? He said, but I'm actually really not the leader so much anymore because the leadership is taking place at the micro enterprise level, right? They have the right to decide what they're going to do. They have the right to hire and fire, and they have the right to distribute rewards. So what's left, and what Jung Raymond says is my biggest challenge, and he talks about Steve Jobs and Michael Dell in the first retirement, and Bill Gates and people like that. And what he says is, my real challenge is he says, we have thousands of leaders in the organization right now. They just have to recognize what they're doing. They have to recognize their leadership role. And he says that's hard to do because they haven't thought of themselves in that role. But my biggest challenge is to make sure they recognize that they're playing a leadership role already, that we're not, there's a woman named Lisa Gill who I was on a podcast with last year. She said, these organizations are not leaderless, they're leaderful. And I think she's absolutely right. These are hires a leader-full organization. They've just got to see that and realize it.
Okay, well, this has been wonderful. It's been a really, really good discussion, very rich, very enlightening. Our next webinar is going to be in October, on October 12th. Professor Richard Freeman from Harvard and MBER is going to talk about China's scientific leap forward and the strategic role of Chinese scientists. And we hope you'll join us, and that will be followed by programs in November and also December. let me thank Bill for just really a wonderful discussion and a very enlightening dive into what Hire is all about and what's going on. And also, please let me thank the staff of APSI, Yen Li, Renata Kwan, Xiao Juan Ping, and Alex Nickley, all for their help. And these programs wouldn't be able to go forward without their help in supporting us, everything from IT to marketing, etc. And also, again, let me thank our two co-sponsors, the Center for International and Global Studies and also the Center for Innovation Policy. I appreciate everyone's help and their support. And again, let's thank Professor Fischer for just a truly wonderful talk.
Dennis, could I thank you? And could I say that without Denis Simon, I wouldn't even have a career. So I should be thanking him over and over and over again. So thank you as always.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's a little bit embellishing, but I'll take it anyway. And good night to those on the East Coast, and have a great morning for those who are out in Asia. And again, thank you all very much. Good night now.
Good night. Good night.
Thank you.